show, we have Carolyn Collins, who is the science coordinator for K through 5 Wellesley Elementary Public Schools. Welcome, Carolyn, to the show.
Thank you.
I should really call her, teacher adventurer, but we'll get to that in a second. Carolyn has had a very adventurous career. She has worked for a very famous publishing house. She's worked for an equally famous, how do I even describe Sotheby's?
Auction house, I guess.
Sotheby's.
Fine art auction house.
And Carolyn has also had articles written about her by her students. She taught 4th and 5th grades here in Wellesley. And then she decided to get on a boat and sail around the world, halfway around the world maybe?
Halfway around.
To the Caribbean, which is still, halfway around the world. And besides that, she's done a lot of other interesting, wonderful things that we're going to talk about. So first I'm going to ask you, teacher adventurer. So I want to know about the stuffed animal that made you laugh and laugh, that you couldn't stop laughing about, the funny stuffed animal that your student brought in?
Yes, years ago it was when we were about to do testing, and I was trying to lower the level of anxiety within the students, and so I told them they could all bring their favorite stuffed animal into school. Now I had this one young boy, Teddy, who tended to be on the quiet side, and he brought in this stuffed animal corgi that was about this big and this high. And so he set it on his desk, and I looked up, and all I could see were his eyes creeping out over the top of the corgi. And I just wanted to make sure he was safe. It's like, are you okay back there? Are you safe back there? Everything good? And I just started laughing, just seeing this little pair of eyes over this stuffed animal corgi.
All day long?
All day long.
And it was in the same spot?
Just right there on his desk, right on his desk, protecting him, guarding him from ill. It was
That's so funny. I had a geology professor who used to drive like that. So all you would see is just his eyes over the top of the steering wheel. Right. And you'd think that there's no one driving the car. So awesome. That is funny. So Carolyn, where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in this area. I was born in Allington, grew up in Lexington, product of the Lexington Public Schools. Was fortunate to be able to do a lot of traveling, so I feel like I've lived in other places. But yeah, I'm a local
while
girl.
You were growing up?
While we were growing up. My father was a university professor, so we spent a year abroad in London when I was only 5 years old.
Oh, nice.
And then we had opportunity to travel after that, and then travel another summer after he had taken a sabbatic leave.
And where did your dad teach, and what did he teach?
He was a drama professor at Tufts University. Nice. And my mother is a musician, and she was a pianist.
Oh, awesome.
So I grew up in a very arts family.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fabulous. And how would you, if you had to compare Wellesley to Lexington, how would you describe or characterize the personality of that town compared to this town?
That's very hard to say because I grew up there so long ago. Right. I won't say how long, but it was certainly a number of years. I think they're very like in the sense that they both value education and that it's a very highly educated population. So certainly there's similarities there. But again, I work in Wellesley, I don't necessarily live in Wellesley. I grew up in Lexington, but that was a number of years ago, so it's really hard to compare. Right. But I think the biggest thing is that just the quality of the public school system and how much they value education.
And you did live for a time on the boat.
I lived for 11 years on our boat. We decided in 2000 we had the good fortune to be able to take a year off and go sailing. And we went down the East Coast along the Intercoastal Waterway, and I saw beautiful parts of this country I'd never seen before. We went over to the Bahamas, came back. One thing led to another, and we had to go back to work. But at that point, we had already been living on the boat for that whole year that we were traveling, and we figured, well, we want to go sailing again. So we know we can live on the boat. Why not just continue to do so?
And apparently cats live on the boat quite well as well.
Cats live on the boat quite well. At our top, we had 3 cats living on the boat. All cats have taken a swim at one point or another, but cats actually swim fairly well.
So it's not true that they dislike water?
Oh, they hate water. It's absolutely true they hate water, but they can swim. And I only had to dive in once to rescue a cat and pull him out of the water, so that's good. We were able to fish him out every other time.
And was he chasing fish?
No, usually the cats, when they got themselves into trouble, it's if we were at a marina and they were just trying to jump from the boat onto the dock or onto another person's boat. That's when they realized. But one time a cat fell off when we were at anchor, and I don't know what she was doing. I still haven't been able to figure that one out yet. But
awesome. So I know that you majored in Spanish and history. So tell us what took you to decide on those subjects.
Like much of my life, I feel like my whole past, I've just taken paths that I didn't know were going to be in front of me, and I've just kind of veered at different times. Spanish, I went to college actually thinking I was going to be a Russian major. One of my favorite courses in high school was Russian Lit, and I had decided that I was going to become a Russian major and be able to read Dostoevsky in the original. I had already studied French and Spanish, so I figured, another language, no problem. Russian defeated me. First semester of my sophomore year, I began to think, why am I doing this? As I'm breaking out in a cold sweat and I can't remember how to say anything other than Zdravstvuyte, which is probably very badly pronounced.
And you have excellent pronunciation on that.
Do
so
I?
You do. You really do.
Okay. Well, that's the one word I
have
can
Russian
remember.
friends, and I hear that a lot.
All right. So junior year, sophomore year, I was actually then just having to decide what I wanted to do. And as I mentioned before, I had the good fortune when I was young to be able to travel through Europe for several times, 2 times with my family. And I really wanted to go abroad my junior year. So I loved Spanish. I had never been to Spain, so I thought, fine, let me learn Spanish language and literature.
And you found it a little bit better than Russian?
A lot easier than Russian. I loved it. But then when my junior year, I was looking at the course selection book, and I realized because I am naturally drawn to history and learning about history, I was most of my way there for the history major, so I became a double major in Spanish and history.
Oh, how exciting.
Yeah, it was
and
fun.
then you also did an exchange program. Is that right? Or you spent a semester abroad?
I spent my junior year in Barcelona. I also did, before that junior year, I spent a month in Andalusia in Spain, in the south, at a special program with the University of Granada. And I also took French in Talois, France for a little while.
Oh, nice. Look at that.
So I've been very fortunate.
So you're very multilingual.
I used to be.
You might hit that Russian again in your spare time.
In my spare time.
That's
and I have taken a German class too.
There you
so
go.
There you go.
So
I'm working my way through
you're more
through
than
Europe.
halfway there. So what did your parents think about your decision to major in history and Spanish?
My parents, I credit most of what I've been able to achieve to my parents and their unfailing support for whatever choices I made. They completely understood me wanting to be abroad, and they got that piece of me. And when I chose to move to New York, they were after living in Spain, we'll probably get there, they were the first to say, go for it, let us know how we can help you. If you need help, we're always here for you. Likewise, when I chose to leave New York and go into education, same thing. So my parents have been unfailingly supportive of my choices, and they've always been the foundation that lets me be and become who I've become.
And did you find that, do you have siblings, I should ask?
I have an older brother. I mentioned that my father was a drama professor and my mother's a musician, and my brother is a mechanical engineer.
Awesome.
And we haven't quite figured out where that came from, but it's out there somewhere.
Oh, nice. And did he feel the same about traveling? And did you find that he had the same thoughts about?
Again, he's very different than I am.
Yeah.
No, he tends to be, he likes to stay around here.
Yeah.
He likes to go places where he can speak the language.
Yeah, that helps.
It does help.
It's good. So why is Nelson Mandela your hero?
I am so in awe of everything he has done and everything he stands for. That he could go through the trials and tribulations that he went through, that he could be imprisoned for so long, consistently maintaining a pacifist approach, and then later to rise and become the president of a nation that 10 years before that looked like that could never happen. I just think his peaceful message and his perseverance and ability to overcome everything he overcame just is outstanding.
And has this been your childhood hero or a recent hero, and have you added others to your list?
In general, I admire people who have the courage to stick to their convictions and to pursue the things that they know are right. I say that, and for me, it's those people who are willing to put themselves out there to improve the situation for other people, not for themselves. And so certainly along that line would be Martin Luther King. There's lots of people, and it's hard for me to name specific people, but I think more than anything else, it's a willingness to help others, and put others before themselves.
That reminds me of the saying, the measure of a person's character is their character through adversity.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And did you, by any chance, grow up hearing about the American women's movement?
I can remember Billie Jean King and Bobby Rigg and the whole big thing about the tennis match.
Right.
So it was out there. I think my first real awakening came in college when I took a history of American women course. And that started putting things into perspective, because before that I hadn't necessarily thought about her story as opposed to history.
Right.
And then the second follow-up was Women of the 20th Century, and that's when I read Betty Friedan and started all those books. And that's what really started getting me realizing that women have always had a history, even if it's not the history that's written in the books.
And how do you feel the movement is coming along today? Where do you think women are today? This is the 50th anniversary, so.
I think we're improving. I still think there's places to go. I was listening the other day to NPR, and I heard a story about how Mayor Menino is trying very hard to have Boston be the first city with true salary equity for women, and I think that's commendable. It's a little disappointing that we're not there yet, but we can keep working and keep trying.
Do you feel that in some ways things have become a lot easier, and people have sort of taken women doing things more for granted than more of a surprise as it used to be in the past?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think certainly there's a lot more opportunity for women. I think the girls I see come through my classroom now, I don't feel they sense the same limitations that might have existed when I was a child.
Excellent. So I wanted to ask you to give us a story, something that stuck with you while you were working for the educational publishing company that you were with. Could you give us like a story that, from your experience and time there, that sort of stayed with you? Something you learned, something you enjoyed?
What I find interesting about even having that job was just, it's almost as if education was predestined for me. I was working for Scott Forsman in Spain. They're a big educational publisher. They were the original publishers of the Dick and Jane books. Which have long since gone away, although I still have one. I think I had one in my classroom.
I have one too.
Yeah, I had to keep it for my classroom, just had to have it there. But at the time, it was an opportunity for me to be able to be back in Spain. And so that was my biggest driving feature. The fact that it was an educational publisher is just the job that I was able to find. But I just, as I say, I find it's almost as if there was this predestined that I should somehow cycle back to education when it was nowhere on my horizon.
So sort of an instinctual thing that you just felt attracted to doing, and
perhaps.
And so you were there and fresh out of speaking Spanish and learning about history and having graduated, and you thought, this is something that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And Sotheby's. Give me a story from Sotheby's, and that's got to be much more exciting and
it was a very
dramatic.
It was a very dramatic place to be working. I was working there at the time. Now things go for millions of dollars all the time, but I was working there when Van Gogh's irises sold for $53 million, which was a record at the time.
Yeah.
It was an exciting and dynamic place to work. When after working in Spain for the educational publisher, I came back to the United States, and basically, being a Spanish and history major, which doesn't necessarily qualify you for any one job in particular, I moved down to New York and happened to get the job at Sotheby's. I was in the unglamorous side of the business and the business side of things, but it was just an exciting place to be. They sold the jewelry of the Duchess of Windsor.
Right.
And it was a lot of fun.
And you were the head of the computer operating.
By the end,
Computer
again,
systems.
it was one of those cases where my life just took some odd little paths along the way. I started off in their catalog subscription department and ended up working with their computer department to develop the auction system.
And I think they're one of the first people to have computers run their entire operational base.
Might be. One of the fun things for me as well, we were doing the auction business, and we were sort of first trying out the computer system. Since I knew the system better than anybody else at that point, because I had helped in the development of it, there were impressionist auctions in which I was right up there at the podium where they were working on the keyboard and trying to enter the bids and trying to maintain my poise up there in front of this, with the flashing cameras. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed working there. I was really proud of what I had accomplished there. Through the course of my time there, I did become the assistant vice president in charge of training and support for the worldwide computer operations, which brought me over to London, and I was on the verge of going to Monaco and Brussels and all sorts of other places. But I increasingly became a bit dissatisfied. I'd be at these auctions where people were paying millions of dollars for paintings, and yet walk home and see people living on the street. And I increasingly had a hard time reconciling these two different worlds. It was around that same time that I began to feel just a general malaise about what am I doing with my life. And so I had to really take some time to regroup and rethink and decide what it is I wanted to do.
And did your background in history and Spanish help you at all while you worked at Sotheby's? Even though you were doing the computing system?
The history perhaps, the Spanish not as much, just because I soon learned when I got to New York City that most of the Spanish speakers in New York City are from Puerto Rico, and the Puerto Rican accent is considerably different than the Castilian Spanish accent. So it was, I could look at them and I could get every third word.
At least something. 1 out of 3 isn't bad,
no,
right?
Not bad, not a bad stat.
Awesome. So tell us about your Tetley teabag moment.
Well, and that happened in New York, and it was around that same time that I started having the same general feeling of malaise. And I had tea one time, and the teabag message was something to the effect of the best use of a life is to do something that will outlast it. And that got me thinking, you know, what am I doing? What have I achieved at the end of the day? And, you know, all right, so I've helped people, I've shared knowledge, I've done those things, but it wasn't quite enough. So I started to think about, all right, well, what do I like about my job? And it was that. It was the sharing knowledge. It was teaching people how to do things. It was helping people. So I thought, how do I take that piece and make it something that's more meaningful for me? And it immediately was clear, well, do it with children. So I scrapped everything, moved back in with my parents, and got my master's degree in education at Lesley University in Cambridge. Was very fortunate after that year of getting my master's to be hired in Wellesley.
And you have other certifications beyond that as well.
I do now. I am now also certified for, I have administrative certification to be either a principal or assistant principal.
Awesome. And why elementary school?
Because at the time I was going into the program, I loved history, I loved reading, I loved math, I loved science. I did not want to have to compartmentalize into one subject area. I just really, being an elementary teacher, you have the ability to be a generalist, and that's what attracted me to that. Do
you think that being an elementary school science coordinator, you have the ability to do the maximum amount of STEM education?
Yes, I do. I think at this point, you know, one of the things I've loved about teaching is the connection I have with kids and feeling like I've been able to help, if I can help just 1 or 2 students, if I can be a lasting influence on 1 or 2 of my students in any given year, then I've accomplished a lot. Now in this role, I like it because I can not only affect those students, but I can also affect teachers, and I can help start promoting STEM education.
And that would be the main sort of similarity or difference in terms of between the difference or similarity between teaching in a classroom versus what you're doing now.
Right. Teaching in a classroom, you know, one of the things I think I miss is building that relationship with a core group of students. But right now I'm able to go into classrooms and I'm getting to know the students, and I'm working in classrooms from kindergarten through 5th grade. I'm working in all of them, working in the schools across the district. So I will get to know children from kindergarten, be able to watch them all the way through. The job I have now, if all goes well, I can also affect the teaching. And if I can affect, whereas in my classroom I could affect those 20 students, now if I can help the teachers across the district, and each of those teachers will help their 20 students, and so it's that ripple effect.
Right. Well, that is a big goal. It's a lot of people.
Well, keep my fingers crossed.
I'm sure you'll be successful, but that is a lot of work. So I applaud your effort, and I don't envy you. So, and what did you love most about being a student?
When I was a student? Or because I would say, well, and
it seems to me that you're still continuously
learning. Well, that's
learning,
what I was going to say, is I should rephrase that. Is I think, you know, I hope if nothing else, my background kind of gives voice to that whole idea of lifelong learner, which is what we hope for our students here, is there is so much out there and there's so much new to learn and explore that I think we all need to be continually learning. So I think what do I like most about being a student is just thinking about the world in new ways.
And how do you feel nationally versus internationally about STEM? And that's science, technology, engineering, math.
I think there again, I think we have a ways to go here in this country. Certainly you can look at all the statistics about reading in Singapore and Finland and math and all these things. I think we have the potential for having a world-class education system. I think in the U.S. in general, we're struggling to get there. I feel very fortunate to be working in Wellesley where we have the support for this kind of thing. I was watching, I don't know if you know, there's a video that went viral at one point called Did You Know? And it was written back in 2006 or 2007. And one of the lines in that movie that really stood out is that right now we are preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented yet to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. And I think that speaks to STEM. Everything, our world is changing exponentially. And I think we need to be really preparing our students to embrace that challenge.
So not only to take their place in existing jobs, but to create new careers and jobs on their own.
Right. One of the other statistics I heard was that in the top 10 in-demand jobs in 2010 didn't even exist in 2004.
Right.
We don't know what we're doing and where we're going. So I think the best gift we can give students is the ability to create, innovate, to think for themselves. It's no longer about a certain set of content knowledge. We need to develop thinkers, and that's where the STEM education is so important.
And historically, what do you think accounts for the disparity or the difference in levels between the American educational system versus other parts of the world? What accounts for that?
Well, I think in part we have to consider the size of our country. We are one nation. There are certain traits that are American traits. There's, certainly there is an American identity, and I certainly know that from when I've lived abroad, both living in Spain, having traveled in South America. There are things that make Americans distinctly Americans. The same point, we are a huge nation with a lot of diversity in terms of beliefs, philosophies. So I think part of the struggle has been to try and create a one-size-fits-all. I agree with the idea of creating standards so that all schools are being held to a high standard. I just think it's challenging to weigh all of the conflicting factors in.
Awesome. I like that. That's a great way to look at it. It's a good point. And so my last question is, what do you think about the pilot STEM project that's being, the initiative is being set up, the Wellesley Science and Technology Expo?
I think
set
it's
for
very
April 5th
exciting.
of next year.
April 5th of next year. I think it's very exciting. I think the idea of having just a day when we can all come together and just celebrate engineering and math and science and technology and all of these things together. I know that the organizers are planning to make this a K-12 event. We've got such wonderful resources here in Wellesley.
And it's K through 12 and adults and seniors. And so it's open to the entire community.
And we've got such wonderful resources. We've got so many people doing so many wonderful things. Let's find a place to get it all together and share that.
Right. Well, and do you think that it would succeed in inspiring students to stick their hands into actual technology or sciencey things and
I hope so.
Explore and set things up on their own?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn.
Well, thank you very much.
This has been such a pleasure.
Fun. Thank you.